end of it though.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning. That's German.
Well, it wasn't Spanish, I know that.
No.
Donde está?
Donde está?
It's like the only German phrase I know.
Before we get started, I want to thank you all for voting to pass the bylaws. I don't know if you all noticed, there was a little provision. It may not even have been printed on the copy you saw when you voted. That included a raise for all the Sunday school teachers. I appreciate that.
Yes, you get more things. Yes. We're doubling your credit.
Yes.
We're thanking you.
I get twice as much coffee now.
Take off and fling at the feet of Jesus.
All right, we are looking at and reading and talking about. Sure, thanks. That would be wonderful. 2 Samuel chapter 23 today.
We got G.I. Joes on the back.
Yeah, how about that? We'll get to them in a minute. I want to start off, before I read the chapter, there's, let's see, 23 is after 22. Chapter 23 kicks off, it says, these are the last words of David. Before we get to that, I thought it'd be, there's, famous last words. We hear about all that. I've got a couple of things just to kind of review here. It's kind of interesting to hear some people's famous last words. William Henry Seward, U.S. Secretary of State and architect of the Alaska Purchase, was asked if he had any final words. He replied, nothing, only love one another. That's nice. Those are nice last words. Marie Antoinette, on her way to the guillotine, stepped on her executioner's foot and said, pardon me, sir.
Literally. Please pardon me. Oh.
Sir Isaac Newton, he said, I don't know what I may seem to the world, but as to myself, I seem to have been only like a boy playing on the seashore and diverting myself now and then in finding a smoother pebble or a prettier shell than the ordinary, whilst the great ocean of truth lay all undiscovered before me. That's a serious guy.
Yeah.
Drummer Buddy Rich, big band drummer Buddy Rich, he died following surgery, passed away. As he was being prepped for surgery, a nurse asked him, is there anything you can't take? Buddy Rich replied, yeah, country music. Okay. During the Civil War, General John Sedgwick, while his men were trying to take cover from a Confederate sniper, stood out in the open and said, they couldn't hit an elephant at this distance. After which he was immediately struck by the sniper's bullet and killed. Surgeon Joseph Henry Green was checking his own pulse as he lay dying. His last word was, stopped. One more. Yeah, there's just one more, sorry. Donald O'Connor, actor, dancer,
Yes.
entertainer.
Yes.
Yeah, Singing in the Rain. He also hosted the Academy Awards in 1954. When he died with his family gathered around him, he joked, I'd like to thank the Academy for my Lifetime Achievement Award that I will eventually get, which he has not gotten yet.
It is not.
Anyway, there's all kinds of famous last words.
I'm still thinking about that one, Ron.
Isn't he the guy that played Francis and the Mule or Talking Mule or something like that?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Did he? Did. That's right. I forgot about that.
I remember that show.
I like the one that's on the gravestone that said, "I told you I was sick."
I told you so.
That's good.
All right, let's, I'm gonna go ahead and read chapter 23 and then we'll get into, we got a variety of topics today, so we'll get into the discussion. Well, I'm just gonna read the first 7 verses first. These are the last words of David. The oracle of David, son of Jesse, the oracle of the man exalted by the Most High, the man anointed by the God of Jacob, Israel's singer of songs. The Spirit of the Lord spoke through me. His word was on my tongue. The God of Israel spoke. The Rock of Israel said to me, when one rules over men in righteousness, when he rules in the fear of God, he is like the light of morning at sunrise on a cloudless morning, like the brightness after rain that brings the grass from the earth. Is not my house right with God? Has he not made with me an everlasting covenant, arranged and secured in every part? Will he not bring to fruition my salvation and grant me my every desire? But evil men are all to be cast aside like thorns, which are not gathered with the hand. Whoever touches thorns uses a tool of iron or the shaft of a spear. They are burned up where they lie. So when it says these are the last words of David, they probably aren't literally his last words. There's an exchange between David and Solomon recorded in 1 Kings, for example, that probably occurred after this. But it's generally thought these are basically it's the last psalm David wrote. Probably it's the last time he really sat down and thought about something and worked out how he wanted to say something. So what's interesting? One thing that's interesting. He's kind of, again, it's assumed this is towards the end of his life. He's had all these things happen in his life. He's done all these things have happened to him. He's got this whole life to look back on. And it's interesting, the 4 things he focuses on when he's taught in the introduction to this song, he's referring to himself, how he refers to himself. He says he's the son of Jesse. He says he's the man exalted by the Most High. He is the man anointed by the God of Jacob, and he's the writer of the Psalms, basically. Which, and again, it's kind of how do you look at yourself? How do you want to look at yourself when you get to where David is? How do you want to be able to remember yourself? Now, David certainly remembers all the not so great things he's done or the not so great things that have happened to him, but it's kind of nice to see that how he wants to be remembered, essentially. And maybe that's a reminder to all of us. How do we want to be remembered? What do we need to be focusing on? What do we need to be emphasizing? Again, not to downplay mistakes, not to downplay other things, but here's his chance to say, this is who I was, and those are the 4 things he focuses on. And then he goes from there, and he's got a little thing here about leadership. In verse 3, when one rules over people in righteousness, when he rules in the fear of God, he's like the light of morning at sunrise on a cloudless morning, like the brightness after rain that brings grass from the earth. I don't know how many contemporary leaders you can remember that those phrases come to mind when you think of them. Last time a U.S. president, you thought of them as the morning at sunrise. I don't know.
That's what I was, yeah.
That might be the last feasible, plausible one. That, but what's the standard? What's the requirement here? What does David say needs to happen for somebody to even think about being that kind of leader, to be that kind of figure? Ruling in the fear of God. What does that mean? What does that mean to you, to rule in the fear of God? Could be a lot of things.
Servant leadership. I mean, leading
with humility.
Mhm.
I think you're
Right.
acknowledging that there's consequences if you don't do what,
Yeah, yeah, the fear of God is,
kind of like you would be fearful of a parent if you step out of line, you're fearful
Yeah.
of not doing what you know he wants you to do.
right, yeah, good, good. Yeah, that was kind of my take on it, that fear of God. Yeah, I mean, just as a leader, you are kind of expecting the people you're leading to follow certain behaviors, certain standards, and maybe there's consequences if they don't. I mean, it applies to you as well, right? You know, there's an
Yeah.
authority over you that there's a standard you need to be meeting as well. So it's kind of a nice principle of leadership, I think. So again, he's near the end of his life, and then he seems to have made peace with, again, all the things he's done, that the choices he made, the decisions he made, that weren't always the best. In verse 5, he says, "If my house were not right with God, surely he would not have made with me an everlasting covenant."
Speaking in tongues. Somebody speaking.
The chipmunks are back.
Yeah.
So again, you know, not to make a big deal, but David certainly understands the things he's done, but he also understands that and we've talked about this a lot, you know, that he understands he has forgiveness, that you know, he has God's grace and forgiveness, that God was still willing to make this covenant with him, and was still willing, to bring to fruition his salvation and grant his every desire. And then, you know, one last warning: evil men are to be cast aside like thorns. So, kind of just a nice little summary, and a quick summary too. I mean, you take your whole life and turn it into 7 verses. Kevin.
Yes.
It's Rabbi.
It's gonna,
Your name's Kevin. That's
yeah,
right.
it is.
Okay.
One of the things that it kind of stands out to me that I really maybe hadn't seen before, when he talks about when one rules over men in righteousness, when he rules in the fear of God, that is kind of when he rules in the fear of God is like it's just a phrase in the middle of that. I kind of get the sense that he's maybe trying to say, you can do what you, as a leader, you can do what you think is right. But what is it based on? Is it based on the fear of God, or is it based on something else? And we've seen in his reigning over Israel, sometimes he gets selfish, and he does things out of selfish motives that are not considering the fear of God at all. And it really messes things up for not just for him, not just for his family, but for the whole nation. It messes things up. So I'm wondering if there's maybe not some reflecting back over his life and saying, when I did it right, when I did it in the fear of God, and not just trying to do what was right based on how I felt at the moment, this is what happened. It was like the sun coming up after the rain. Okay, so it could have been a hard time that we were going through as a nation. But if I stuck to what God was having me do and what he had called me to do, then it was like the sun came up after that rain and things got better. But when the flip side, he doesn't say it here, but the flip side would be when I followed my own way, when I made up my own righteousness, when I decided what was right and what was wrong, well, then we got in trouble. Okay.
Yeah.
So I'm just kind of wondering if maybe there's what he hasn't said here comes into play as well. When I did it right, this is what happened. Well, what happened when you did it wrong?
Right.
Maybe
Yeah.
that's what he's getting at in verses 6 and 7 when he kind of talks about evil men. Would he be including himself in there when he made mistakes?
Mm-hmm. That could be, and it also occurs to me now, maybe he has Solomon in mind when he's writing this.
Maybe he is giving
He's
instructions to
saying
his
this
son.
is part of his last words to Solomon, saying, remember the fear of God, or we will be cast aside. So yeah, so I think there are a lot of interesting ways to take this. And again, all the ways he could choose to want to be remembered, he happens to pick these four. His family, exalted, anointed, and it's interesting. He points out that he's written all these psalms that seem to really be, and he probably should be really want to be remembered for that. For the what a large part of the Bible they are, and how they've been a comfort and a help to people for so many years. So it's kind of I think it's just basically it's another psalm as far as I'm concerned. Liz?
This comment in here about, will he not bring to fruition my salvation? Does that strike anybody else as a bit odd?
As odd.
Yeah, that he would, I wonder if this is an English term or something, but salvation, how so? Because this is Old Testament, so
Yeah.
salvation, why would that be a term at that point?
This is an NIV. Is salvation in the other translations people have? Is it translated as salvation?
I just find it odd.
What verse is that, Sharma?
Verse 5.
Verse 5,
yeah.
The end of verse 5.
His agreement is arranged and guaranteed in every detail. He will ensure my safety and success. That's NLT.
Okay. Because it's also, and I didn't have a note here, but I can find it here.
King James has salvation.
Yeah, do you have King James
Yeah.
there? What does the first part of verse 5 say in the King James?
Although my house be not so with God, yet he hath made with me an everlasting covenant, ordered in all things and sure, for this is all my salvation and all my desire, although he make it not to grow.
Yeah, and that was kind of interesting. The King James Version starts off verse 5 by saying, even though, basically it says, even though my house is not right with the Lord, right?
Yeah.
And the
Oh,
NIV says, if my house were not right with God,
Yeah.
surely you would not.
That's interesting.
It's just one of those, and I don't know how to reconcile those, but yeah, Heather?
Well, when people come to the end of their life, there's like a developmental, it's like Erickson's developmental, where I forget the exact term, but they review their life and they start to think, are they happy or not with the life they lived? And if they're not, they can become very bitter. They can become very kind of angry. But it seems like, that's sort of, he's thinking over his life and things, but it sure seems like he's looking forward to a Messiah, almost like he's, even though he's saying, I've messed up so much, but he's finding peace, with his life, like kind of like what Kevin was saying. I think he acknowledges he's not forgotten a lot of the things he's done wrong, but it's like he's got a bigger vision of that it's going to be okay, and whether that's he's looking forward to the Messiah or I don't know.
Tim?
This is an interesting find here. Now, this is saying that Testament doesn't mean a state of salvation when it speaks of God's saving deeds, but rather a process. But the word they said that salvation comes from Das Heil, which is interesting because of the stuff that had to deal with Nazism and how they would come up with that word.
Well, what does
The
Heil mean?
salvation, the man, the person,
Oh,
and,
okay.
and they always had a process. You kind of wonder if they construed the Bible in such a way to manipulate it to their, because that's inherent in the history of Nazism.
Mhm.
The,
Real interesting.
David, from all the messianic psalms he wrote, he was looking forward to the Messiah. He knew it wasn't his righteousness because there's one of the psalms he says, "Blessed is a man unto whom the Lord will not impute iniquity." So David understood what grace meant, and he wrote so much in the messianic psalms about Christ coming that the Savior would be the one. And I also wrote the famous one, the Lord said it, and my Lord said it in my right hand until I make your enemies the footstool of your feet.
Right.
That's one of the things one of the songs Christ quoted to the unbelieving Pharisees, and Sadducees.
Yeah.
That, Jesus was, the arm of Yahweh, Yeshua,
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
Messiah.
Good.
I mean, there's a lot in the Old Testament, especially the David's Psalms and Isaiah and Jeremiah about coming of the Messiah. So,
Yeah.
Sure word, like Peter said, the sure word of prophecy about the Messiah.
Yeah, good.
Verse
Bill?
Was Isaiah written before 1st and 2nd Samuel or after?
I don't know.
I mean, I don't, this is in chronological order here, but the reason I ask is if you go to Isaiah 53, I mean, it was predicted that Jesus was coming. He told everything about him.
You would, so if you take, when was Samuel written is the question.
Right.
Nobody knows for sure when it was actually penned. The events happened way before Isaiah comes along, but are they, you're talking probably 300 years before Isaiah? This stuff's happening, but who wrote it down? We don't know. And when.
Okay.
Chapter 5 in the Living Bible says, and it is my family he has chosen. Yes, God has made an everlasting covenant with me. His agreement is eternal and final seal. He will constantly look after my safety and success.
Oh, that's
So
very good.
safety and success. Okay.
That's very different. Okay.
Wow.
There's a distinction between the covenants too, because if the literal translation of the Bible says, he's made a covenant, age abiding with me, and throughout his life and throughout, his kingdom of, in the Old Testament. And surely he knew there would, all the prophets prophesied of the new covenant that would come. So olam, or age, pertains to a finite long period of time, or it could be a short period of time.
Okay.
Well, it does bring back, though, this whole concept that I think Liz brought up. Is he getting to this point and he realizes there's something more and something missing? That his salvation is not secure like we would understand that we have security in Christ. He is hoping so. He is believing it because God had made a covenant with him, but he's not 100%, it seems to me, sure of his salvation the way we would be sure of our salvation approaching our death.
That's a good thought because, for one thing, because he knows himself. He knows what he's done, knows what he's capable of.
Yeah.
And without that assurance that we have, how do you get an assurance?
That he has been one of those
Don't.
thorny men he's talking about. But how do you get that assurance? Yeah, that you are clean before the Lord. He's hoping so. He's hoping so.
Yeah.
But I think it's an honest admission at this point that there still is in his soul something missing. And that something missing, he he's kind of connected to this everlasting covenant that he has is going to result in Jesus Christ.
Yeah.
So the two are maybe connected there.
Could be. Interesting.
Just FYI, I was looking at some of the Bible commentary, and it says this verse is extremely difficult and admits two interpretations. So,
At least two.
yeah,
Well, those people should have been in Logos class because we've come up with at least a half
Yeah.
dozen.
Exactly. We could do that.
the Hebrew admits either rendering, but that of the ancient versions gives a higher idea of David's spiritual discernment.
Okay.
Well, the whole thing, the salvation is by grace, and he knew of that grace. He even said after his first child by Bathsheba that died, he said that, I will go to be with you, he had that assurance, So he sure, and like that, I said that verse before, blessed is the man to whom the Lord will not impute iniquity. In other words, it imputed righteousness of Christ is what saves us, right?
Mhm. Yeah. Okay. Interesting. We better stop there. Tim's got the last word.
She brought up the word salvation, so I'm just gonna keep rolling with it. And it kind of goes along with the message today. That it was very well construed by evil people to, in a that really drove World War II.
What was, I'm not following. What was construed?
The way they use salvation, because now I'm just kind of following a little bit farther on that we're using the word salvation for what they were trying to portray Hitler as this next
By they, you mean the Nazis.
What was the
that
term?
yeah, Nazis, that here's one of these, a blessing that was given before a meal. And it says, Führer, my Führer, given of God, protect me and keep my life. I mean, that just in itself is so bad.
Yeah.
Salvation, what, I just Googled this, but it says salvation was by grace through faith in the Old Testament, the same as today. They looked forward to the coming Messiah. We look back to the cross. Compliance to the law of God in the Old Testament could be summed up in these words: do or die. In the New Testament, die and do.
Okay. Interesting.
That's cool.
All kinds of ways to look at it.
Yeah.
It's a conundrum, at least. All right, let's move on to the mighty men. Verse 8. These are the names of David's mighty men, and I'm going to struggle with these names, but
Sure.
here goes. Josheb-Basshebeth, Tachemonite, was chief of the three. He raised his spear against 800 men, whom he killed in one encounter. Next to him was Eleazar, son of Dodai, the Ahoite. As one of the three mighty men, he was with David when they taunted the Philistines gathered at Pasdammim for battle. Then the men of Israel retreated, but he stood his ground and struck down the Philistines till his hand grew tired and froze to the sword. The Lord brought about a great victory that day. The troops returned to Eleazar, but only to strip the dead. Big help.
Yeah.
Next to him was Shammah, son of Agi the Hararite. When the Philistines banded together at a place where there was a field full of lentils, Israel's troops fled from them. But Shammah took his stand in the middle of the field. He defended it and struck the Philistines down, and the Lord brought about a great victory. During harvest time, 3 of the 30 chief men came down to David at the cave of Adullam, where a band of Philistines was encamped in the valley of Rephaim. At that time, David was in the stronghold, and the Philistine garrison was at Bethlehem. David longed for water and said, "Oh, that someone would get me a drink of water from the well near the gate of Bethlehem." So the 3 mighty men broke through the Philistine lines, drew water from the well near the gate of Bethlehem, and carried it back to David. But he refused to drink it. Instead, he poured it out before the Lord. "Far be it from me, O Lord, to do this," he said. Is it not the blood of men who went at the risk of their lives?" And David would not drink it. Such were the exploits of the 3 mighty men. Abishai, the brother of Joab, son of Zeruiah, was chief of the three. He raised his spear against 300 men, whom he killed, and so he became as famous as the three. Was he not held in greater honor than the three? He became their commander, even though he was not included among them. I'm not sure how you do that.
Yeah.
Benaiah, son of Jehoiada, was a valiant fighter from Kebzeel who performed great exploits. He struck down 2 of Moab's best men. He also went down into a pit on a snowy day and killed a lion. And he struck down a huge Egyptian. Although the Egyptian had a spear in his hand, Benaiah went against him with a club. He snatched the spear from the Egyptian's hand and killed him with his own spear. Such were the exploits of Benaiah, son of Jehoiada. He too was as famous as the 3 mighty men. He was held in greater honor than any of the 30, but he was not included among the 3. And David put him in charge of his bodyguard. Among the 30 were Asahel, the brother of Joab, Elhanan, son of I'll just read the names. Elhanan, Shammah, Elika, Helez, Ira, Abiazar, Mabunai, Zalman, Maharai, Heled, Ittai, Benaiah, Hiddai, Abi Albon, Asmaveth,
Wow.
Eliba, the sons of Jashan, Jonathan, Hiam, Eliphalet, Eliam, Hezro, Parai, Egal.
Just give me.
Am I? Well, Zelek, Naharai, the armor bearer of Joab, Ira, Gareb, and Uriah the Hittite. There were 37 in all. Okay.
Well done.
We've heard of Uriah before.
Yes.
So on the back of your handout, I thought this is kind of a cheat sheet that the internet is great for.
Great.
Now Uriah is not on this. There actually was a little blurb here at the bottom of the first column about Uriah. I cut that off so it would fit on the page better. We all know who Uriah was. He had his own individual entry. So First Chronicles chapter 11 also has a listing of the mighty men and talks about their exploits. The names are a little bit different in First Chronicles as opposed to 2 Samuel. There's a few differences. I think it's there that Josheb Bashabeth, who's credited with 800 kills here, is credited with 300 in First Chronicles. There's some differences. Again, kind of whether it's a translation thing or just an error in transcription or what, we're not sure why. But one thing to remember, where did most of these guys come from? How did they get affiliated with David? If you go back to 1 Samuel chapter 22, when David is still being pursued by Saul, and he's going through the caves and he's trying to hide away from Saul and kind of trying to survive, basically. 1 Samuel chapter 22 starts off, David left Gath and escaped to the cave of Adullam. When his brothers and his father's household heard about it, they went down to him there. All those who were in distress or in debt or discontented gathered around him, and he became their leader. About 400 men were with him. So the assumption is most, if not all of the guys, the warriors, the mighty men mentioned here all came from this group of discontented, displaced followers of David. That they didn't all start off as great mighty men. That they grew into it. They realized what their strengths were. They became a cohesive fighting force, however you might characterize it. Over time they became known as mighty men. In verse 24, we all remember who Asahel was. Abishai and Joab's brother. That chased after Abner. This is, earlier again, chased after Abner. Abner told him, why don't you just quit chasing me? And he stuck his spear out and ran his spear through Asahel, and Asahel was killed. But he's, so we're, I don't, what that says about when this was written, because it's referring to a guy who's been dead a long time. But it's interesting that somebody we saw so far back in this book is listed among the mighty men. I'm not sure how that all fits chronologically. I didn't see any commentators really spending any time on it. What else do we have here? In verse 11, Shammah, son of Ag the Hararite. Shammah, he defends the field full of lentils, brings about a great victory. Now there's also a Shammah, at least in the NIV, there's a Shammah referred to, where is it here? Yeah, verse 25, Shammah the Haradite. And then verse 33, Jonathan the son of Shammah. Well, is this all the same Shammah? I don't think it is. If you look at, I look at the interlinear Bible that goes through every word in the Bible and says this is the 15th time this word has appeared in the Bible, and it's the 15th of 32 occurrences, whatever. The Shammah referred to in verse 11, that is the first of one appearance of that iteration of that name in the Bible. So I think the other references to Shammah further on in the chapter are referring to different people, just so you know.
Mhm. That's interesting.
That occurred to me. Who are these guys? Who are these guys?
Yeah. Right.
John,
Yes.
why is Joab not?
66.67% of the brothers are listed among the mighty men. 1/3 of them aren't.
Where's
Why
the
not?
others?
I have that question. It's a
Yeah,
good question.
yeah.
Why do you think?
I don't know.
Nicely done.
That's why
You threw the ball back.
asked.
Really, why? What? Because he killed David's son? Has he killed a lot of people that he probably shouldn't have killed?
Had a little bit of-
Well, I don't know that Abishai probably didn't kill people he shouldn't have killed
Anger
either.
Yeah.
I don't know either. It's an
Was he
interesting.
considered to be above all of the others?
In charge of the entire army.
Well, I don't, I wouldn't think so, I wouldn't think so, but that doesn't mean anything. I'm not sure. I personally, if I had to pick something, I would say because of the politics, basically, of who he killed, of the things he did, specifically probably against what David thought he should be doing. I don't know that even Abishai did things against David's wishes to the extent Joab did.
So Joab kind of had a mind of his own.
I think he did. Well, I think Abishai did too. And Asahel did too. I mean, he was going to get Abner regardless. He wasn't going to quit. I mean, they're all obviously brothers. They kind of approach life the same way.
David's
Asahel,
David's nephews. I'm sorry.
yeah, they're all David's nephews. So yeah, I don't know. I just don't know. Yeah, Jeff.
These are on the right there, those 30, those are all army men.
Yeah.
The little.
Little green army.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
They just use
The silhouette.
taking out the hand grenade.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But it's
Oh, I was kind of wondering where they got the army.
Exactly.
These guys are all.
If we got-
I'll bet you could buy a set of those somewhere.
Brilliant observation, right.
And the helmets.
Yeah.
Yeah, helmets. Anyway,
Like the
yeah,
little comment you have there underneath Jonathan, he says, kill the guy with 12 fingers. You got, Nicely.
But it's interesting. I mean, they talk about David's mighty men, and then he talks about the three mighty warriors, Jashabim, Eleazar, and Shammah. And then there, Abishai and Benaiah are counted as even greater than the three, or the leader of the three, but they aren't part of the three. And maybe that's the same question as why isn't Joab among the group? What sort of politics are going on here that gets you counted as one of the mighty men and gets you
Well, he
excluded
kind
from
of
the
stands out throughout the whole story. He kind of stands out. So maybe
Yeah.
these other guys are just the guys, and he's
Yeah,
yeah.
a little above them,
yeah, he's,
above them.
yeah.
Yeah, could be. I don't know.
Did he fall out of
Maybe
favor at
David
the
died
end,
before he got to Joab.
though? Did Joab fall out of favor at the end?
Well, he got fired. So,
That's
Yeah,
falling out of favor.
yeah,
He got fired, didn't he?
You're fired.
yeah.
Amasa.
He got put back.
Wait till next week.
There's always next week.
Yeah. Always something. So anyway, so let's look at we're getting this, in verse 11, or I'm sorry, verse 13 talks about when David's in the cave and he'd like a drink of water from the well at Bethlehem. So apparently this, that we're going back chronologically back before David had taken Bethlehem, when the Philistines were still in control of it. He says, "Boy, I'd really like a drink of water from that." And we don't know who specifically, which three did this. We don't have any indication of which three it was. They said, well, "Okay, we'll get you a drink of water. Nothing to it. We'll go behind the Philistine lines and get you a drink of water."
A certain well.
A specific way. Someone will give me a drink of water from the well near the gate of Bethlehem.
He didn't want Pepsi, he wanted Coke.
Yes.
Yes,
Right.
Coke Zero.
Yeah. It's got to be the right one.
I
So
wasn't gonna bring that up, Becky.
So they do this and they bring the wine and then he pours it out as an offering. Now, I mean,
That would
it's
be
kind
really
of, I mean, I think we can all understand that you made such a great sacrifice to bring me this. I can't drink it. It deserves more than that. It deserves more significance than just a drink of water. This is, I mean, you risk your lives for this. This needs to be offered up to God. I think, it's a great symbol. It's a great act that I would think they would all understand that.
Mhm.
That they would
At least taking a sip of it.
maybe a little sip. Or one of them says, "Here, take my canteen and drink that at least."
Yeah, yeah.
But that's a great thing to recognize, and maybe this again a reminder to us, maybe to recognize when people have sacrificed for us, maybe not at the risk of their lives, but people throughout our lives, people sacrifice for us, starting with your parents, teachers, whoever, to be cognizant of those kinds of things that people do for us through the years. Nancy?
Or was David, when he said that, was that more of a longing to take back Bethlehem, be done conquering the Philistines? Oh, that this thing that is so sweet, this delicious water that's so familiar, that we were, that was available to us all the time. Was it more figurative? Or was he just saying it out loud and he really didn't mean for them to
Well,
go get it?
that's a
And
good
he just
thought.
was-
Yeah,
He was just saying,
Wow, I understand.
oh, to go back home.
Oh, to
my
be
home,
able
my
to
home,
do that.
To my,
Yeah.
I would like to go back to, house that I lived in that's
How it
burned
used to
down,
be.
whatever.
how it used to be, yeah.
Well, that's it. That's a good thought. I mean, the NIV has it that someone would get me a drink. How do other versions phrase that? Could they be taken differently?
What's the scripture?
Verse 15. Oh, that someone would get me a drink.
It's from Bethlehem too.
Yeah. That's a good thought. Yeah, Bill?
Do you have any idea how
Not
far of a distance it is between the cave of Adullam and the valley of Bethlehem to Bethlehem? How far do these guys have to go and carry the water back?
Well,
Yeah.
oh,
That's a good question.
Okay,
Well, there's a Dumin. If that's right, this is 5 miles maybe,
Hmm.
so not
Okay.
undoable.
Yeah.
Yeah, I hadn't thought of that, but still, I mean, maybe these 3 guys, maybe, you know, they're very brave and they're great warriors, maybe they aren't real smart though. And they hear David say, oh, that I could, and they take that to mean literally, go get me a drink of water.
That's a thought.
And then David said, where'd those guys go?
Idiots.
What are you doing? I don't
Do you want a straw with that?
know. But anyway, it's, again,
Kevin had something.
Well, I was gonna say, I think the moral here to me is the loyalty that they had for him was something that touched him deeply. He had no intention when he said that for somebody actually to go do it because of the risk to their life, but they did it anyway because they wanted to show themselves loyal to him.
right.
And loyalty has been something that he struggled with. Is Joab loyal to him or not? Is his own sons loyal to him
Right.
or not?
Right.
Can he trust this person? Can he trust that one? You know, Ahithophel, is he loyal to me or is he not? You know, so somebody who would do this and show that kind of kindness, and so he wants to, I think, show them how much it meant to him. But anyway, yeah, I think that there is this point of these guys are special to me because these guys have my back
Mhm.
all the way through.
Right.
All the way through.
Nancy,
New Living says, oh, how I would love some of that good water from the well by the gate in Bethlehem.
okay. See, that's a
It
little
was
more
more
open to-
like longing.
Yeah,
for
okay.
something,
And then in
Not
chapter,
a-
in verse
Not a
17 says,
request.
and in 16 says, so the 3 men broke through the Philistine ranks and drew the water from the well and brought it to David, but he refused to drink it and said he poured it out before the Lord. No, my God, he exclaimed, I cannot do it. This is the blood of these men who have risked their lives.
Yeah.
So he poured it out as a blood offering.
Right.
Even though it wasn't blood.
Yeah, I think they would have understood why David did that. They would have appreciated that. Again, maybe it's a reminder to us to appreciate, to notice, to be cognizant of and understand and react to the sacrifices people make for us. Now, Kevin touched on something that I wanted to get to, and why, I say, who are these guys? Why these guys and why not Joab? Well, maybe it's because, and maybe we can draw a distinction between these guys and Joab because of how Joab has behaved and kind of try to take things under his own, and do things his own way. Maybe what distinguishes these guys from any other warrior, any other soldier David had was their faith and their belief in their leader. Maybe what distinguishes them is that they're all willing to go break through the Philistine lines to get him a drink of water. Maybe it's, and again, maybe this speaks to us. I mean, we talk about, salvation by faith, not by works. Their faith, they don't have Jesus to believe in, but they have David. They can follow their leader. They can have faith in their leader, and they can act according to their faith in their, and we're back to the leadership, back to the proper leadership that to them is like morning on a clear day. Maybe that's what distinguishes them. Lynn?
Okay, well, we mentioned loyalty, that David was all about loyalty. Where was his loyalty to Uriah? And and is he maybe living with that regret? Is that why maybe loyalty became so important to him? Because he saw what happened when he was not loyal to one of his men?
Could be, yeah. Yeah, I don't, it's hard to imagine the bit with Uriah and other things, that those have to be with him the rest of his life, that those have to be constantly in his thoughts about causing regret, whatever emotions he attaches to it, that those are always at the top of, in the back of his mind, that, yeah, don't forget this. And that's why he treasured that. Maybe that's why the faithful, loyal men here are there and Joab isn't. Because Joab basically, I guess maybe could you say Joab kind of just did what he thought was right, what he thought needed to be done. He didn't, and sometimes it coincided with what David thought needed to be done, but not always. I don't know. Yeah.
Have you ever heard of a Bible study on Joab? I just find him fascinating. I mean, it's just interesting.
Why don't you research that?
Yeah, I'll be right on that on my free time. Just interesting guy.
No, I think it is. He's an interesting character.
Yes.
You kind of like to know what makes him tick a little bit. All right. So yeah, I want to end with, is it faith in a true leader, in somebody who really deserves or has proven worthy of being a leader, as under the standards David himself has set out in this psalm at the start of the chapter? Is that what makes you a mighty man or woman? A mighty believer, a mighty follower. Is that what it takes? Not so much that you can kill 300 Philistines, but that you have that faith and that loyalty and that willingness to make those sacrifices. Is that what it takes? We're out of time. Yeah,
I'm
Ron.
just gonna say, Samuel was a prophet, and he came to Jesse, wasn't it? His father, David's father. And he looked at all the men, and the youngest of all the people you wouldn't think, but God knew through Samuel was a prophet. And remember, Samuel, God appeared to him as a child. So it was God's choosing David,
Yeah.
God's hand. And David made that one terrible sin with Bathsheba and Uriah, but he repented of it. There's a lot of Psalms, where he exclaims, that he's how sad he was and how the Lord chastised him for it and delivered him out of a terrible mental state, said a terrible pit. Thou hast delivered me out of, wasn't it?
Right.
Something like that.
Yeah.
So he suffered. He suffered great chastisements. So
Yeah.
it's basically, he repented of it. So got to think of the David after he repented and his acts after that, rather than,
Yeah.
But any leader can, we can all.
Well, again, that's why I think that's why people identify with David so much, because he makes mistakes like we all make mistakes.
Yeah.
So, but he does understand that he has been forgiven, and he keeps going on. He goes on, carries on.
Oh, yeah.
All right, we're out of time. We're way out of time. Let's have a word of prayer, and we'll be on our way. Dear God, thank you for your word. Help us to learn from it. Help us to take from it those things that we can use, that we can learn from ourselves, and be with us this week. Keep us all safe. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
Amen.
Thank you all.
Thank you, Doctor.
These rock papers. Yeah, rock papers.
Yeah.
Good job.
You have a guy with a shield and a
Google it
spear.
again. So why is
One guy that's got
the
two
original
swords.
one of the mighty men and even a member of the second?
And one guy that has a
Cut out
spear
of
and
this
a
list.
spear.
First of all, consider Joab's crimes as expressed by Saul. So the Lord will return his blood on his head because he struck down